You know, a dream is like a river, ever changing as it flows. And a dream is just a vessel that must follow where it goes, trying to learn from what's behind and never knowing what's in store makes each day a constant battle just to stay between the shore. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Maxwell Ivy, known around the world as the Blind Blogger, and this is another episode of What's Your Excuse, where I hope to help you break through your excuses by sharing interviews with people who have overcome adversity or thrived in spite of difficult life circumstances, people who have struck out on their own and started a unique business, people who have actionable, real-world tested advice that they can offer to help you make more progress towards your goals, and people who I just find interesting, inspiring, or personally motivating. And you can find the show at theblindblogger.net. And also, if you want to get on more podcasts, and this is something that's coming up a lot lately with everybody stuck indoors because of Corona, one of the things I do is I help people get booked on podcasts, but something I'm even more excited about now is helping people prepare to be good guests, helping them through the process, helping them understand their story, the power of it, how to tell it, giving them practice interview sessions, and then recording a interview on the What's Your Excuse show before booking them on podcasts, and then also offering mentoring along the way so that for those first 3 or 4 interviews, they'll have some feedback from me to tell them where they did great and where they can improve on some as they go forward. Because this is all a learning experience. I've got over 7 years doing it, but a lot of people are going to be doing their very first podcast in the very near future. And so you can go to theblindblogger.net/8 weeks. That's the number 8 weeks, and check that out. And at this point, I would normally mention my sponsor, Chip Edwards, but since he's actually the guest on the podcast this week, I'm just going to do his intro. And hopefully after you hear us talk about him and his story and what he does for bloggers, podcasters, and creative entrepreneurs, that I won't have to do an ad for him. So Chip is a really good friend of mine. I've known him for almost 2 years now. We met at MapCon in Philadelphia, an event that's now called Independent Podcasters Conference. We sat next to each other, got to become friends. I heard him talk about his service. I decided to hire him. We've been working together for a while. I really appreciate what he does, and I also understand the power of what he does for people, for creators, for their brands, and how that's going to become even more and more important in the future. You can find him at createmyvoice.com, or you can say, Alexa, play Create My Voice, or you could say, Google, talk to Create My Voice. And you can't do this on the devices yet, but go to his website. He has a link on there. You can reach out. You can schedule a conversation, find out more about what he does, how it will impact you and your website. And I would say the one thing I want y'all to realize before we're through here today is 2 things. One, that Chip's a really cool guy, and 2, that your invocation name is your brand name, and it is even more important than your website name. And if you don't claim it now, it's going to cost you down the road. So, Chip, welcome to What's Your Excuse? How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Max. Thanks for having me on the show here. And I definitely appreciate our friendship for the last several years. It's been good getting to know you better and working together.
It has been a good experience. And, I think our friendship and what's come from it, you being a sponsor, me being a client, I think it's really a great reminder that when you go to a conference, don't consider the conference a failure because you didn't sell your books or you didn't hire a new client at that event. Sometimes sitting next to somebody at a conference or hanging out with them at the before or the after party or the mixer is really just the first date, and it can lead to so many other great things. But I think a lot of people, if they don't sign some business, if they don't go home with a check, they feel like their experience was a failure.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we've talked about even MapCom before, and that's where we met out with that Joe Pardo's independent podcast conference, and I don't know, I remember talking later saying, I'm not even sure why both of us were there at the event. At the time, neither one of us were podcasters, and why we were at a podcast conference, I'm not sure. But the fact that we met each other and spent some time getting to know each other is kind of helped both of us and kind of get new friends.
Yeah. Well, I think we were both there hoping that podcasters would be our ideal clients. I was there hoping that some of the podcasters would want me to do the grunge work of booking them on other people's shows so they could grow their audience. And I figured you were there hoping you could convince the podcasters that they needed to be on the smart speakers and they needed to hire you to do it. So, we could make the argument in our heads as to why we were there, but I don't think either one of us went home with any business.
No, not that first conference. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. And me personally, I'm sharing this because, one thing I'm known for is being authentic and sharing the good and the bad with my audience. As of PodFest, I had attended 8 conferences in the previous 2 years, and you could actually say it was a total of 10 events because in one city I did 3 events in the same week. PodFest is the first time that I ever signed a new client out of PodFest. And even that was a gentleman that I had spoken to the year before at PodFest and had a great conversation with and thought, well, when I get home, he's going to call me. But he didn't call me. But we had, laid the foundation, become friends the year before, and we come back again this year. And then on Monday morning, I not only had a new client, but I had money in the old PayPal. So, it is proof that as entrepreneurs, sometimes one of the hardest lessons we have to learn is no doesn't necessarily mean no forever. It just means that they weren't ready right this minute.
Yeah, like we had a similar experience with our first conference. Actually, a number of our first conferences. We Pam and I went to our first conference and we demoed the smart speaker stuff that we had, thinking that everybody was gonna be a line out our sponsor booth to sign up, and it was a learning experience that most business requires a relationship, and a relationship doesn't happen when you the first time you talk. It takes a number of times of getting to know each other, building the rapport, and then after that you start exploring opportunities. So yeah.
Yeah. So I tell people often that sometimes I get a better answer from my guest than the question I was planning on asking. So we're off to a great start. So why don't you tell people a little bit about how you got to be into this area? I know from our conversations that you were never one of those people who intended to be an entrepreneur. So tell people, how did you end up, where you're at now? Because this has to be a long way from home for you.
Well, yes, actually. So it's actually pretty interesting because I don't know if you remember, every summer Amazon has this Amazon Prime Days, and they've got some pretty good discounts on a lot of stuff. Well, this was probably 4 or 5 years ago, and during Prime Days, my wife ordered an Amazon Alexa shortly after they came out. And during Prime Days, and I got home that day and she was showing off her new toy of all the stuff that it could do, shopping lists and setting timers and answering questions and stuff like that. And I thought it was a pretty cool toy. Well, I'm a technologist, which means I like to program and I like to work with cool technology stuff. And it just so happens at the time at my corporate job, I was building out an innovation lab. And so after my wife showed her Alexa off to me, I thought, I'll bet you could make this thing do stuff. And sure enough, I did some research and realized that Amazon had a plan to get these voice devices, not just in smart speakers in living rooms, but they had to get these devices everywhere is where they were going with it. And then they had made a way for people to actually create who create content, or who own a brand, to be able to build them out and make these Alexa's devices, these voice devices, do more stuff and carry on conversations as a brand owner, as a content creator. So so I built some stuff for work and showed it off, and actually ultimately took it up to the CEO and the advisory board, showing off, here's some stuff that we can do with this from a business perspective. But the thing that made me realize these digital voice assistants were going to be big was when I came home after I took my wife's Alexa into the office and was showing it off. So Pam asked me, "Hey, where's my Alexa?" I started to tell her, hey, I was showing it off at work and stuff. And she says, "Hey, I use that thing. Get your own if you're going to use it."
So I got to stop you. Did the corporate people like the idea, or did they say it sounded cool but not for them? How did that end up?
So actually they loved it. And it was from a large corporate perspective. There's a lot of questions, a lot of political stuff that happens. So there was a lot of opportunity there, but from a huge corporation perspective, there was it was going to be a lot of work to be able to get through the hoops that it was going to take to be able to make it go. But we definitely explored a number of different ways that the device could be used. And in the innovation lab that I was working on was really where are these things going to be in 3 to 5 years, and what are the things that are going to actually impact the business, and this voice devices was absolutely on the list. And we were starting to work through what it was going to take from a large corporation perspective to use it.
But then I'm trying to remember. Did you decide to retire, or how did it go from working on the process of getting them to adopt using the smart speakers to being running a company where you're helping other people do that now?
Well, so at the time, let's see. So let's see. So that turned out to be, it was maybe a year and a half later, after I was showing this thing off at work, that well, you know how big corporations go. We ended up separating between us, and not a bad thing. But in the past, so I like things safe. Let's put it that way, a little bit safer. And so I generally have moved from one corporation to the next and kind of worked my way up the ladder in the corporate side of things. But all the time I was kind of interested in building my own thing, but being an entrepreneur is not safe. And so this whole idea of, okay, I've got this opportunity, this technology, this new voice technology, digital assistant stuff is going to be big. And so this is my opportunity, either for staying safe, getting another corporate job, or to actually launch out on my own. And this, in the past, I'd always stayed safe. But this time I decided, I've got to do it. And I think that actually comes back to stuff that I've learned from you, and from a number of my other close friends that probably struggle with stuff more than I've probably lived a blessed life compared to most people. But I've learned something from you, and that is that excuses only keep me from doing what I want to do. And so that idea of if I've always wanted to do this, but I just want to stay safe, this was the opportunity to say, let's not stay safe. Let's become an entrepreneur. Let's take this thing out on my own and do what I've always wanted to do. So for me, thank you to you as far as kind of teaching that type of thing to me, as far as you've got to, many times we're the only person holding ourselves back. And so you've got to step out and you got to ask and you got to make it happen.
Well, I appreciate you mentioning me, but I didn't even know you when you made this big decision to maybe not play it as safe as you had before. Because when you go into a business for yourself, it you can have the appearance of safety if you have, if you have savings, or if you have credit, or if you have a retirement income or annuity or something. You can have the appearance of safety, but when you start your own business, you can never really be sure. And I actually picked up a new line from David Goldstein, a fellow me and you both met at PodFest. He's another visually impaired entrepreneur. He says that it's okay to be careful. It's not okay to be fearful. And the two are not mutually exclusive terms. You can be, he said, you don't have to be fearful, but you can still be careful. And it sounds like that's what you did, which is why I mentioned it, that you have taken quite a bit of a risk starting your own business and being an entrepreneur. But I would imagine at this point, it was a matter of which concerns me more, taking the next corporate job and being unhappy, or taking this risk and possibly being very happy.
Exactly. Yep. And so, and definitely glad I did, because of actually many things. I mean, one of them is the people that I've met, the friends that I've made, and it's pushed me out as far as conferences, and to be able to start being a speaker. And so I've had the opportunity to teach about voice technology, and I can't remember. I think I was at 12 conferences last year or something like that, going around the country speaking about the voice branding and what's happening in the industry right now that is setting up voice technology to be a really major thing as we move forward, where it's making things so convenient that that people are going to use their voice first, which is one of the big hashtags that's out there right now, is voice first.
Right. And one of the things that I like about how you've managed the public speaking, because being on the stage and being a public speaker is not something you did much of before you started this business. But I like what you did. You didn't refer to it as speaking. You referred to it as teaching.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times people would be able to conquer those fears if they just changed what they called it. For example, I like to say that people would eat tofu and hummus more if they had better names. And people would probably start podcasts more often if they didn't call them podcasts. So talk about how considering yourself a teacher allowed you to be a really good public speaker and an ambassador for voice technology.
Yeah, so that's actually a good point, because speaking is difficult for me. Actually, the thing that's probably the most difficult is the ad hoc, or the
question and answer.
Yeah, exactly, where you've got some question that you've got to carry on a conversation and you don't know where it's going. Sometimes that's difficult for me. But when I think of things as teaching, of, okay, I've got some information, how do I structure this in a way that I can communicate that to other people? That changes the whole game for me. And so when I started in on the speaking, I really thought of it more as teaching, and which I've done my whole life. I like to teach in many different venues. And so I instead of applying to speak, I think of it more like applying to teach, and that works for me. Put my lesson plan together, and here's what I want to communicate.
Yeah. Now I've heard Chip speak 3 times now, I think, maybe 4. And the one thing I always take away from your talks is how well prepared you are, how much it seems more like a performance even than a lecture. So even though it's not something that you used to be really good at it, you've found a way that's your own way of approaching it as teaching, and then also being as prepared as possible when you start, that works for you. And I'm really impressed with it. I'm also impressed with the fact that knowing how much you see yourself as being poor at the question and answer and having to come up with stuff on the fly. I'm impressed that you're taking the leap and doing the podcast interviews, and that you've pretty much given me the honor of having the first interview with you as you try to take advantage of this Corona situation that we're all in, and encourage more people to use voice speakers.
Yeah, well, I think it's pretty clear that that podcasts are becoming huge, and they're one of the next marketing, or actually they're not next. I mean, they're now, as far as being able to reach an audience. And so anybody that's got information or a message that they want to get out, podcast is a great way of doing it. I mean, that's been one of the things that I've loved being at these podcast conferences, Podfest Expo and MapCon and DC Podfest, where it connects you with a lot of influencers. And influencers or podcasters are people who have an audience that wants to hear their message, and being on a podcast is a great thing to do. And so that's why I've been working with you as far as this whole idea of, okay, how do you refine your message? How do you how can you give it in a way that that works in a back and forth kind of dialogue mode and format? And so that's been really helpful for me. And I think, because I think podcasts are going to be huge going forward, huge now. So good place if you've got something you want to get out, good place to get it out.
Yeah, and for those of you who are listening, I did not ask him to say these things or pay him. It just so happens that, this is all part of a process where we have been working on, and it's helpful to both of us, because I feel like if I'm going to present myself as a teacher or a guide, somebody who can help people get ready to do podcast interviews, I need to have at least done it for somebody other than me. So, here you are about to do more podcasts to promote your brand. And so this has benefited both of us. It's great when that happens. And I'm looking forward to seeing your podcast interviews on other shows, and hopefully working with you to continue to refine your message and the way you respond to their questions. This has actually been kind of energizing to me. It's something totally brand new. And, while I love the work that I do every so often, to have something that brings curiosity and new challenges to you, that can be really beneficial. So I'm looking forward to this,
Good.
All
Yeah.
right. All right. So let's talk about your invocation and how important that is to bloggers, podcasters, and other creative entrepreneurs.
Okay. So yeah. So let me give a little bit of background around that, because we talk about smart speakers, and smart speakers are really just the kind of the tip of the iceberg. The same voice technology that are in smart speakers like Amazon Alexa and Google Home, that same technology is in a lot of things. It's in in your smartphones. It's in cars. And then the big thing that it's going into now they're calling them wearables. So like your earbuds that you use when you're working out at the gym, your glasses, they've got them in a ring. I mean, stuff that you now have on you and you take everywhere with you, they're putting this voice technology. So not only is it able to help you, play your podcast or what other audio that you're playing, but they can listen to you, and so they can respond to you and help you. So the idea that as this technology is getting everywhere and people start relying on this technology to make their lives easier, as opposed to sitting down at a keyboard and typing things in or pulling their phone out, they can just ask for stuff, is changing how people actually are going to be getting information in the future. So I think I mentioned it a little bit ago, where Amazon and Google both made a way for people who have content brand owners, content creators to be able to put their own voice app, is what they call them, out on these devices, so that they can manage the dialogue between their audience and their content. But the way that these voice apps are invoked, or how you start these voice apps, is through what's called an invocation name. Invocation name is similar to a domain name on the internet. So if you have a website, you have a domain name for your website. On voice devices, you have an invocation name, and so when people use that invocation name, that's how the smart speaker, the digital assistant, knows to connect with your voice app. And so the invocation name is going to be the new domain name going forward in the future.
And then how important is it to own your invocation name?
So that's a good question. So the interesting thing on Google's side, and they've got 1 billion of these voice devices out there. What Google did is they said that the first person to register their invocation name owns it. And so it's going to be critical for people that have a brand name, to get that voice app out there to secure their invocation name for their brand. Because if you don't, then somebody else may be able to register your invocation name with your brand, and now they control that interaction with your audience when your audience uses that brand name.
And a lot of audiences, a lot of people are so used to using these devices that they will automatically assume that your name is your invocation name. Yes?
Absolutely. Yep. So that's the important part, is each one of us has a brand, and that brand is how people identify us and our content. And so that's the important thing of when you're putting your content together and you're choosing a domain name, you want a domain name that represents your brand. It should be the same as your brand. Podcast name, domain name, ideally they're the same, so that your audience can identify your content easily. And then in this voice world, having the same invocation name, so you have it consistent across all these platforms, is actually critical.
That's true. But what I was thinking of is you once told me that if I don't claim a name and somebody else does, my audience may assume that by using the name of my podcast or the name of my blog, that they'll automatically be taken to my content. And that's not necessarily the case if you don't claim your invocation name.
That's whoever has that voice app out there with that invocation name. So let's say somebody else registered, built a voice app with the invocation name of the blind blogger, which they can't because you have one out there already. But if they did, they would then decide what dialogue or what interaction would happen when somebody used the blind blogger. When they said, "Hey, Google, talk to the blind blogger," whoever has that voice app out there is the one that gets to decide what dialogue happens after that. So it's critical that you own your invocation name or your voice app for your content.
Right. My audience could innocently be thinking, well, Max is the blind blogger. I bet you he has an invocation. So Google, talk to the blind blogger. If I didn't have that claimed and somebody else did, they could say, Google, talk to the blind blogger. And instead of going to my website and reading my content, they could go to another website and possibly be delivered content that they weren't looking for, or that is damaging, or possibly even be sold things through Alexa and Google that I wouldn't want to have any part of just because I didn't claim my invocation name.
Yeah, and the point is that you don't control that dialogue. If you don't own that invocation name, then you're not controlling that dialogue. And so that's the critical point about that. Same as the domain name. I mean, you need to have your domain name out there so that you can, so people can find your content. Same in the voice spaces. having your invocation name with your brand, and that's how you let your audience know this is how you get to my content, is using this invocation name.
Right, right. And of course, one difference that just occurred to me between websites and brand and invocation names is if somebody files for a .com, I may still be able to file for a .net or a .biz, but that isn't the case with invocations. And once the name is grabbed up, it's gone.
That's true, and it's actually a little bit more than that, because there are because in the voice space it's based on sounds, not spelling. So so if you have a similar sounding brand to somebody else, it is possible that that even in the domain name where it's spelled differently, but as long as if it sounds the same, the first person to get those sounds is the one that owns that interaction. So that's one of the things that I show in when I'm speaking or going around these conferences, is a couple of different examples of well, even here's a good example. So Capital One, we know them as a credit card banking firm, which is great. But how many different ways are there to spell capital, and how many different ways are the way to spell one? So so you could have multiple people owning the visual version of that brand, but only one person is going to own the audio version of that brand.
You know, I'm kind of disappointed in myself because I've heard you speak a couple of times, and I've heard you do this segment with the audio sounding names usually at the end of your talk, and this part just never really sunk into me, that it's not just the name, it's the way the name is said. So the audio sound is what the invocation is based on.
Correct.
Even if you, so like you said, you know, like I can think of 4 different ways to spell Capital One. If one of those 4 was not the banking credit card company, but they claimed the invocation for Capital One would be in a mess, wouldn't they?
That's exactly right. And that's why, now, not a whole lot of people know about this. And so that's one of the reasons that I've been going around talking at conferences, is sharing this information, because as brand owners, this is going to be absolutely critical and huge. And being early to the market in this, or being the first one out there and claiming your brand is going to be critical.
Right. Are we going to have cases where people will be able to sell their invocations or file squatting cases on invocation names?
So what Google has done so far is there are certain brands that Google has protected, and what I've run into when I've registered a couple of them is Google has asked me to demonstrate ownership. And so if I've got, and basically that means I've got to hook up to a website that is owned and say, okay, see, this website proves that I should be able to get those sounds.
Okay.
And the other thing that they've done is you can't just, so in the internet world, you can just register a domain name, $35 or whatever, and $15, and you can claim that name. You don't have to do anything with it. You can just buy the name.
Yeah,
But
you
in the
can buy the
voice
name and
space,
park it.
exactly, yeah. So, but in the voice space, you can't do that. So what Google is requiring you to do is requiring you to build a voice app that actually does something. And so in that case, you've got to register the invocation name with a voice app and get it submitted to Google and have them certify it. And once they've certified that, yeah, that voice app does something constructive, productive, then they release it into their library, and that's when you own that that invocation name. So that's the key part, is building a voice app that does something pertinent to your brand, and then getting it certified by Google.
Right. Okay. I'm Max Ivy. This is What's Your Excuse, and I'm talking with Chip Edwards from CreateMyVoice.com. He helps creative entrepreneurs and business owners leverage the voice speaker platforms so that they can create, protect, and improve their brands. So let's talk a little bit about some of the uses. Like right now, we have a lot of people that are home. We have people that are struggling, trying to figure out how they're going to handle things like school and religious services. Are there people using Alexa and Google for things like that?
Alexa and Google both have a lot of capabilities in them to be able to connect up with other devices, make phone calls, to be able to help with this whole social interaction. So you can, call grandma, and if they've got an Alexa or they've got a Google, you can see, you can hear and or see if they've got a screen on theirs, because these voice devices come in both forms, either audio only or with screens on them. So that kind of stuff is important. They've also got a number of information that they're distributing for stuff that you need to know, and some notifications and the like. It's still early in the market as far as how much is being done with these devices. There's a lot of potential, and people are just starting to using them for more than just asking the weather and what the score of the game is and stuff like that.
All right. Have you created any invocations for colleges, universities, schools, other nonprofit type organizations like those?
Yeah, so I did one for a school, a private school, which was actually pretty interesting, where they wanted to be able to let their the parents know, like, is today a snow day, or what's for lunch, and how's the how their sports team's doing. So there's a set of information that they wanted to make available, and they were doing it through a newsletter, or through a call tree and stuff like that. And they wanted their parents to be able to be cooking breakfast and just ask, hey, is today a snow day? Or, what's on the lunch menu today? And so I built a voice app for them to be able to, where they could update it as often as they wanted. And then parents could just get that information without sitting down at a computer to be able to find out that information. They could just ask for it.
Yeah, and I love some of the photos you post of people using their devices, and I think one you sent me was a woman at her stove or washing dishes or whatever using the Alexa, and I don't think you sent me a picture of it, but you said there are now some people that are getting Alexa on their lawn tractors. I mean, they really do want it everywhere, don't they?
They are pushing to get this technology everywhere, because they realize that all of us want convenience, and we just want things to be easy. And once we realize that it's easier just to ask for things in a lot of different settings, it will be we will do that instead of take the time to pull our cell phone out or sit down at the computer to do stuff. And so Amazon and Google are both racing to be the company that that has their devices everywhere where you want them. Yeah.
Do you think there will get to be a point with Alexa and Google where I'll be able to say, okay, I want to find a list of businesses in a particular niche, in a particular geographic area. I want you to generate me a list and then tell me the names one at a time so that I can contact them. Do you think they'll ever be able to use them more like we use our standard browsers?
So I think, so what do I think about that?
Okay, I'm gonna give you a couple of seconds here to think about it. For those of you who are watching this interview, one thing I think guests on podcasts trap themselves into is the idea that they have to have the answer right away at all times. There is nothing wrong with taking 30 seconds and talking your way through it, or processing it, or just telling the host, that's something I appreciate you asking that question. That's something I've never thought of before. I'm going to have to give that some consideration and get back to you. So when you're being an interview, I mean, and some people, they just can't break character. Some people, they have to be that polished professional that always knows the answers regardless. But for most of us, as long as you get to the answer, as long as you don't just sit there totally dumbstruck with your mouth hanging open, it's all good. Now, there are going to be hosts who are going to see this and write me, and they're going to be mad at me. But I think when your guests are at ease and they're comfortable being themselves, you're going to have a better conversation and get better information, or get more inspiring information for your audience. And that's what I think the whole purpose of us being here for. So, so like I said, do you think we'll ever be able to use our voice speakers as a browser?
So let me reframe the question.
Okay.
So right now, when we're sitting at a computer, we're used to Googling something and getting a page of information, and we're used to going through that that first page and deciding which one, which website we want to click on. But Google knows that's not what we want. I mean, we want the answer to something. When we ask a question, we want the answer. And so Google, even on their web search, they have changed how they do things. And you'll notice a lot of your web searches will come up with the top item is called now a featured snippet. And that's where Google is trying to give you the answer to your question. So you don't have to scroll through that first page of results to decide which one you want to continue researching. So what Google, so let's move this over to the voice world. So in the voice world, almost always we want an answer to something. And so if I want the best sushi restaurant near me, I don't usually want a list of 12 of them that I'm going to go through and make a choice on. I really do want the best sushi restaurant that is nearest to my location. And so, and if the answer that I get back isn't the one I want, then maybe I refine my question a little bit more. And so I don't think that the model in voice is going to be, give me a list of things. I think that what we're trying to accomplish on the back end, we're trying to make the computers do a lot more of the work so that we don't have to do it on the front end. So the user interface is changing from, how can I help you navigate, to how can I figure out what your real question is and give you the answer straight away.
Okay, so for those of us who have to do research, we're going to continue to have to do that on our laptops or desktops.
So the people that actually that is their job, or the fundamental what they're working on, is needing to know all of the different possibilities and do that type of research. Yeah, you're going to need a screen, and you're going to need to do a different type of research. But for most consumers, we're really looking for convenience, and so we don't care about all that research.
I understand. I totally get it. Now, with Google and Amazon and to a lesser extent Siri, are there opportunities for abuse by these big companies as far as whose answer will be that best answer when I request the best sushi restaurant in Conroe?
So yes, because, well, so let me divide it out into two different things.
All right.
When a request comes into these digital assistants, the digital assistants have two different ways that they figure out the response. One of them is they figure out the response internally, and the other is they use a voice app to give the response. So internally, so if you look for things, search for something near me, you're really asking Google or Amazon or Apple to figure that thing out internally and give the answer back. But if you're looking for Joe's sushi restaurant, then what you've done is in the dialogue, you want to be directed to Joe's sushi restaurant's voice app, because you've asked for his content, the branded content, as opposed to the general question. So your question was more of in the general space, and that is going to be the same fight that we've got right now when companies are doing their SEO. How can I make sure that I'm on page 1 of Google search results? Because if I'm not on page 1, I don't exist anymore. So that is going to still happen in the voice space of how do I help Google make sure that when somebody asks for the closest sushi restaurant to me, make sure that Google is going to say, oh, I know about Joe's Sushi Restaurant, and I know where it's located, and I know the ratings about that, and so that Google will give the answer about the closest sushi restaurant. But
So
when I
we'll
have
still,
an audience and I have people that know about Joe's Sushi Restaurant and they want information from me, then I need my audience to say, hey Google, talk to Joe's Sushi Restaurant, or ask Joe's Sushi Restaurant something. And now that Joe's Sushi Restaurant brand or invocation name now directs them into the content that they're looking for.
you know, if we had really been thinking, we would have actually found an actual company we could have referenced today, and we could have got some referral money or some free food out of it or something.
I think so. Yeah, I don't know if there's a Joe's Sushi Restaurant, and I'm not sure I'd go to a Joe's Sushi
I
Restaurant
don't
anyway.
think so.
But,
Well, you know, Joe's Crab Shack was actually pretty good for
yeah, that's
years
true.
until they went out of business because they were not operating in a way that was sustainable, and they've since been bought out by Landry's. And before Corona hit, they were planning on relaunching it as Joe's Crab Shack again. So, but you know, with the name Shack on the end, that kind of doesn't sound too offensive. So, um, so with the voice speakers, and that brings me into a question I wasn't planning on asking, but now I have to because I am a creator, content creator. What are the options for advertising and sponsorship through voice speakers, or are there any?
Yeah. So, so the answer to that is, as a podcaster, you've got some really good ones because, and it's how you do it already, because you interject in your advertising right into the podcast, and so you give a shout out right up front and at the end, and so as podcasters, you're embedding your advertisement into your audio, and so the way that we're going to be doing that in the future is more of embedding that stuff into the content. There are ways that what we help our clients with, as far as saying, well, we can put on a custom header or trailer onto the content to be able to help out with some of those advertising, but people aren't doing it. Most of the time, they're actually just embedding the ads or the shout outs that they want right into the content that they're producing.
Right. And when will we be able to get statistics from voice speakers like we can get from Google and other sites to show whether or not we offer value to people considering on sponsoring a podcast?
So so if you have your own voice app with your own invocation name, then we capture the statistics for the number of people using the voice app and what content they're actually pulling out of from the voice app. So I capture those statistics already, and so I can send you the link for here's where you can see all of your statistics.
I would appreciate that. I don't know why I haven't asked you that before, but I think it's just a matter of got too much stuff going on, and general thing I have to do as opposed to something I should want to do. I should want to see my statistics so that because that's how you attract sponsors. It's
Yes.
also it can also be how you attract better. It can also be how you attract certain guests. There are some guests who won't come on a podcast unless you can justify their appearance with ratings. I haven't had one of those yet, but I hear they exist.
Yeah. The thing with the statistics is that it also helps you with your marketing as well, because you can see as you're letting your audience know, here's how you can get my content on smart speakers, you can see the impact of that as well. And so most of our clients, that's how they're using it right now. Is they're a number of our clients, people find their content even if they don't tell anybody that it's available on smart speakers. But when they start letting their audience know that this is how you can get to my content, either on your smart speaker or on your smartphone or on your earbuds, then all of a sudden the audience goes, oh, hey, there's another platform, or there's another distribution method that I can get to that content. I don't have to sit down at a computer. I don't have to put that into my podcast player to be able to get to that content. And so that's how most of our clients are using it right now.
Okay, now for people who are watching this, I'm going to explain what I just did. I just slapped myself. And the reason I did that is for the last, 7 months now, I've been starting my podcast by telling people that they can find Chip by, what do I tell you? Tell them I say Alexa and Google or createmyvoice.com. And why wasn't I saying you can find the Blind Blogger? You can find me at theblindblogger.net, or, the other two places. I mean, I tell you, sometimes as a podcaster, I just go, sometimes in general, I just go, man, why do I have to learn some of this stuff over and over again? But this is all besides the point. But you did just make a great point, and that is people will assume that our content is available and they may go looking for it. But if we're wanting to get those loyal listeners, the better thing to do would be at the beginning and end of your podcast, when you do your introduction, or if you've hired somebody to do your introduction, maybe you have them update it so that your introduction now includes how they can find you on Alexa, Google, and your website. So no matter what else y'all have learned today, Max has learned a big one today, and we'll see how that. But the good news is now I have a date. I can say that on April 1st, I learned this from Chip, and then on every show that goes out after April 1st, we will find out if doing what I should have been doing all along improves my listenership. So. So it is all about the invocation. Can you tell me what it is about the flash briefings, and are more people using those, or are those going away? Because it doesn't seem like they're as hot a topic as they were a year ago.
Yeah, flash briefings is actually a great way of getting certain type of content to your audience. Matter of fact, Google just came out with a similar version of the flash briefing in their world. The key with a flash briefing, though, is you've got to have really short content. So if your content is more than 2 minutes, then you're really testing the patience of your audience in how they want to listen to flash briefings. So what I usually let our clients know is that generally our clients will have longer form content, and that doesn't work with a flash briefing. But lots of times, almost all of our clients have short snippets, or they've got certain short pieces of advice that would work great as a flash briefing. So each morning you could have, here's a new quip, or a new piece of advice, or some piece of information that your audience would find valuable. Those things are what works well in flash briefings. And so, but you need a new one every day, and it's got to be relatively short, that your audience is going to go, oh, I'm glad I just listened to that, as they're listening to their series of news articles or flash briefing reports from different vendors.
Right. Well, that was going to be my next question: is does a flash briefing have to be done every day?
So technically it doesn't. However, I highly recommend you have a new one every day. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to produce a new one every day. It just means that you have to have enough available so that so that your audience can get a new one every day. So we usually let our clients know that, you need to start with probably a minimum of 60 of these, with the idea that you're going to build them out. And so, most people, if you recycle one from 2 months ago, I'm not going to remember it. And so, 60 of them is probably a minimum. But ideally you'd have, one for each day of the year, and have those cycled through. So it's not something that you've got to produce a brand new one every day, but you've got to have a bunch of them available.
Right. Now, like for a lot of podcasters, I'm not one of them, but a lot of podcasters, when they record an episode, they will go and cut out a minute or 2 minute or 3 minute snippets to post to LinkedIn or place or Twitter, because they have lower limits on how much video you can post at a time. And so if somebody's been doing that for LinkedIn or Twitter all along, then they could basically repurpose those audio files and turn them into a flash briefing.
Yep. Those would be great as flash briefings, because they're good information that they've pulled out that's short enough that people would want to listen to just that. And you could also use that as the driver back into your podcast of, hey, if you want the full episode, here's how you get to it.
All right. And are you able to link to the full episode from the flash briefing, or do you just does it just take them to the website?
So the flash briefing is just information, and they would have to say something to be able to get the full audio. In other words, so you would have to let them know at the end of that little 1 minute clip, that if you want the full episode, then here's what you would say to be able to engage the voice app to be able to get to the full episode.
All right. So, like for example, I could say if you want to hear the full interview, then you want to ask for the Chip Edwards interview on What's Your Excuse. Is that kind of what you would have to do?
Similar to that, and yeah, there's a couple of different ways that you could do it. You could say, hey, ask the blind blogger for episode 395, or you could say, ask the blind blogger to find episodes with Chip Edwards. Yeah.
Well, that's what I would have to do, because in the beginning, I thought if I numbered episodes that I would eventually get it wrong, and plus, if I wanted to refer back to a previous guest, I would have to go and find that episode number. But so my episodes are not labeled with numbers, just with the names of the guests. So as long as it would be okay with me telling them to ask for the interview with a particular host's name, because the name is in the title of every episode. The name of the guest is always in there. So as long as that works, then I'll be okay.
Yeah, we should work together and say, this is how you'd leverage that to be able to communicate to your audience. Here's how they get the full episode. Yeah.
All right. Well, something else I can put on my to-do list, that I need 60 short snippets from current, past, or future podcast episodes, and we can put them together in a flash briefing and then tell people to go listen to the whole episode. I don't know, man. It sounds cool in theory, but it also sounds like something that would be easier done if I started doing it today, and then maybe by the end of the year I went live with the flash briefing.
Yes. Yeah. Sometimes we can generate a lot of work. I mean, it's all,
Yeah. That, or I could hire somebody. Me and Chip have both done coding, him at a much higher level than I ever did it at. And we talked about this the other day. When you're a coder, generally, the longer you code, the more you realize that the code you wrote when you started is horrible. But after you write a certain amount of code, you just get to that point, well, screw it. I'm not going back and fixing all the old code just because it's not elegant.
Yeah, exactly. We'll do it better going forward.
Yeah. My friend Alex Sanfilippo, who I also met at Podfest, I can't tell you where this quote comes from, but it's not his saying. But he likes to quote this phrase, this expression, that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Well, Chip, I've really enjoyed getting to sit down and talk with you again, and I hope that I've managed to ask the right questions to allow people to understand just how knowledgeable you are in this area, and for you to teach them the more important things about using these voice speakers going forward. So, what is of everything we've talked about, what is the most important thing you want people to remember after they listen to this?
So the most important thing to remember is just there's a new brand for the platform out there, and that's called an invocation name. And you're going to want to make sure that you control the message behind that invocation name, both in Amazon and Google's platforms.
All right, and y'all can find Chip Edwards at createmyvoice.com, or you can say, Alexa, play Create My Voice, or you can say, Google, talk to Create My Voice. And I'm really happy because so far today I've said her name about 25 times, and so far she hasn't responded to me. So I must be doing good today, because yesterday she interrupted the podcast during my intro. Which, hey, that reminds me, that's something I was going to ask you about. I hear I can change her name now. Is that actually true, and is it hard?
It's not hard, and she has 4 different wake words. One of them's Alexa, which is the default, and then you can call her. You can have her respond to computer or Echo, and Amazon, I think.
All right.
Yeah. So any of those.
I'm almost. Well, not a lot of people come over to the house. Otherwise, I'd be afraid to change it to computer, because they would automatically assume I'm a Trek geek or something, you know.
Exactly.
But it is an exciting new world with the amount of information we're going to be able to get through our voice devices, and it's only going to get better or worse depending on how you look at it, as they put more and more stuff out on those speakers, and the speakers become get put in more places.
Yes.
So thank you for coming on What's Your Excuse. I really appreciate you as a friend and as a guest.
Thank you, Max. I really appreciated this. This was a great time. I appreciate it.
All right. Glad to hear that. System dialogue. Okay. We had another great conversation, this time with my friend Chip Edwards from createmyvoice.com. Also, Alexa, play Create My Voice, or Google, talk to Create My Voice. And I really have to change her name, because I'm getting tired of having to whisper or keep my voice down when I mention my good friend Chip, or when I mention my own site, which, just to show I'm paying attention, y'all, you can find me at theblindblogger.net, or you can say, Alexa, play The Blind Blogger, or you can say, Google, talk to The Blind Blogger. I think you can do the same with the What's Your Excuse show. I will verify that, but I'm pretty sure that's the way it works. So we talked about how Chip went from being somebody who had planned on being in corporate for all his life to finally seeing an opportunity where he didn't want to play it safe anymore and wanted to go on his own and be an entrepreneur or be a creative developer, and how that's working for him so far. How he was able to do public speaking, even though he didn't think of himself as overly extroverted, somebody who did public speaking, but he always loved to teach. So as long as he thought of it as teaching, as preparing a lesson plan, and providing information to people who needed to have that information, he was able to go up. And I tell you, I've heard him talk several times, and I always feel like, man, that's who I want to be when I get really good at speaking. He's always well prepared, and I think he does much better in the question and answer stuff than he thinks he does. But then I have the same problem. People will say I'm a much better storyteller than I think I am. It's just the way people are. We can always see more in others than we see in ourselves. All the great information about how critical it is to own your name, your brand, your invocation name, so that when people use those names, you get to decide what they hear, or if they've got the screens on them, you get to decide what they see. So if you don't already own your invocation name, then you need to do that. And Chip is really easy to work with. I've had a great experience, a great relationship with him, and I couldn't recommend him more highly. Yes, he is a sponsor of the program, but I think y'all know me well enough to know that I wouldn't take anybody's money if I didn't believe that you should be working with them or purchasing from them. I'm never going to be the kind of person who has somebody on the podcast just because they're willing to write a check. So I really do appreciate the work he's done, the friendship we have between him and me, as well as me and his wife Pam. They have helped me make plane reservations and hotel reservations. They have helped me check in and out of hotels. So they've gone far beyond the kind of relationship you would have with somebody is just a business relationship, and I really appreciate them for that. I'm not saying they're going to do that with every client, but I think that you can expect a high level of personal service from them. So own your invocation name. Just because your people can find your podcast, this is especially for podcasters, just because people can find your podcast because Google has it or because TuneIn has it, that isn't the same as owning your name. It's just like people may be able to read your content as a guest post on somebody else's blog, but that isn't the same as owning the name and having your own website or your own blog. Just like I would tell anybody starting a website or starting a brand, the first thing you do is own your domain name. Make sure that if this turns out to be something that you're going to do for the rest of your life, that you own your real estate, you own that domain name. I would say the same thing for an invocation name. Even if you don't know how long you're going to be well, most of us don't know how long we're going to be a podcaster or an author or any of that stuff. So once you start creating content so you meet the standards for Google and Alexa, after you have a website, you need an invocation name. And one thing I hope y'all will do is, if you have an invocation name, share it in the comments. Give me the opportunity of trying out your content on the voice speaker platforms. And if you're not on there, I hope you will visit Chip and reach out to him, have a conversation about getting your blog or podcast out on these voice speaker devices. He's not a high pressure salesman. You'll enjoy talking with him. And I personally believe his service is very reasonably priced. And part of this is really kind of not sure as to what you say at the end of the show when your guest is also your sponsor. But invocation name, control what content people get and how they get it. And then
your internet connection is unstable.
And then just having the courage to continue doing the work. That even if you're not sure if people are listening, or if you're not sure if they're enjoying it or appreciating it, keep doing the work. All right, I appreciate y'all listening to the show. You can find me at theblindblogger.net, or you can go, Alexa, talk to the blind blogger, Alexa, play the blind blogger, Google, talk to the blind blogger. And I do hope you will check out my new offer, the 8 weeks, at theblindblogger.net/8 weeks, the number 8 weeks, where I'm going to teach you the same things I've been working with Chip on, and that is understanding your story and the power of it, getting better at telling it, practice question and answer sessions, both via email and over Zoom, so that we can record them and you can learn from them, an interview on the What's Your Excuse show, and then 4 podcast or radio show bookings, along with some coaching before and after each of those interviews to help you get better every time. And then if at the end of 8 weeks you want to do more podcasts and you want somebody to do the outreach, then I'll do that for you. All righty. That's my Alexa telling me it's time for Jeopardy, and I don't miss Jeopardy. So I will talk to you later. Thanks again for continuing to support the show and everything I'm up to. I really appreciate it. All right. Thanks, Alexa. Too many times we stand aside and let the water slip away, till what we've put off to tomorrow has finally come today. So don't stand upon the shoreline and say you're satisfied. Choose to chance the rapids and dare to dance the tide.